In 2006, I lived north of Toronto, in Richmond Hill. We lived in a nice condo. We traveled a fair bit. We did wildlife photography throughout North America. I've been to Hawaii and Texas and the Everglades and Yellowstone National Park and Banff. And it was a nice, cozy lifestyle. And on June 9th, 2006, I heard a story about what was happening in Caledonia. And on that particular day, Native protesters had swarmed a senior couple that happened to be driving through town. And the couple drove into the Canadian Tire and got swarmed by about 40, 50 Native protesters screaming and rocking their car. And the elderly gentleman had a heart attack, so they had to bring in an ambulance. And the natives realized that the CH camera crew was across the road videotaping them. And so their solution to that problem was to run across the road, beat up the camera crew, put them in the hospital, and stole the camera equipment. Now, in Caledonia at the time, there were literally hundreds of OPP officers. It's a small town, much like this town here. But at that moment of time, there were actually checkpoints throughout the town where there's actually OPP roadblocks and you had to go through checkpoints. So the checkpoint was literally 40 feet from where this violence was occurring, and the OPP officers watched and did nothing. About an hour later, there was an unmarked OPP van around the corner that was videotaping as well. And so 3 Native protesters swarmed that particular van. And inside was one OPP officer. There was a U.S. border guard and a U.S. ATF agent inside. Now you might wonder why there'd be a border guard and an ATF agent in a van in Caledonia, and that may tell you what really was going on. It had little to do with land claims and a lot to do with smuggling with the states. But anyways, they roughed up the OPP officer and threw him out of the van, and he was unconscious on the road, and they stowed the van and drove right at him, and someone else pulled him off the property. And the OPP checkpoint was about 50 feet away. And they got to the OPP checkpoint, and of course, what would the OPP do? After watching them assault a fellow officer, stealing an OPP van, assaulting U.S. officials, well, they let them go. That's what you do in this country. Because we've been all told that we're equal in the law, in the eyes of the government and in the law, and it's simply not true. It probably has never been true, but it's simply not true in Canada that your rights are equal to other people's rights. And so in Caledonia, which was a small community, one morning they thought they had equal rights. They lived in peace, just like this town is. And within 24 hours, they lost everything. There were streets that didn't have 911 service for 6 years. That means if you phone 911 from your home, the OPP did not respond. Did not respond. I'll give you one particular story, and that is a gentleman went into Toronto to watch the Blue Jays game one day, and coming back, the Native protesters had declared a curfew for the town. Just decided, nobody allowed outside of their home after 10 o'clock at night. And so this guy wanted to drive home. And the natives said to him, no, you can't. You can't go home tonight. You're out after the curfew. And so he drove up to the OPP checkpoint, and the OPP let him through. And about 40 feet later was a native checkpoint, because that's how the town was run at the moment. And the natives said, you can't go home. Well, he drove through the checkpoint, drove another few hundred feet, drove into his driveway, and he got swarmed. And the natives took him out of his car, threw him into their car while his wife watched from inside the house while she's phoning 911. And they drove him back to the OPP checkpoint. Who do you think went to jail? You think the kidnappers went to jail that night? No. It was the resident who dared to drive in his own driveway to go home that night. How dare he believe that he had a right to go home? And of course, his wife kept phoning 911 until they told her to stop phoning 911 because they weren't going to respond. And in Caledonia, OPP officers were kidnapped, tied up, guns taken away, their car was burnt, and the government negotiated their return. No charges. The power station was firebombed, taking out the power for weeks at a time. We would call this terrorism. No charges. Residents were kidnapped, blindfolded, forced to make videos. No charges. The bridge was burnt down. No charges. And this went on and on and on. Extreme violence was occurring. And the OPP were doing nothing. They kept telling the public, we're here as peacekeepers, as if they're UN peacekeepers who don't really do arrests. They're just simply there to maintain the peace, which of course, there was no peace. Well, I lived in Richmond Hill. I had never been to Caledonia in my life. Didn't know anyone from Caledonia. But I decided one day, enough's enough. I have to speak up. All I did was create a website. That was the first thing I did. And I drove to Caledonia one day in July of 2006 and just wanted to get some photos and to put up on my website. And I saw hundreds of officers in this small little town. Checkpoints, fires in the village. And, we drove to where the bridge was burnt down, we drove around. Everywhere we went, we were constantly followed by both Native protesters and OPP officers. And it became clear that you had no rights in this town. Natives could walk into your home, they could take what they wanted, and nobody would respond. When they had these checkpoints, the OPP would watch as natives would stop your car, pat you down, they would check your car, and if they wanted to take something from your car, the OPP did not do anything about it. Nothing. That's Canada. And the political parties didn't have a problem with it. Whether it's liberals or conservatives, it was all about the fact we have to feel guilty because of some historical wrongs, and therefore you have no rights. Well, we don't believe that Jewish people should go around beating up Germans because of some historical wrongs. And we don't believe that black people should be going around beating up white people because of some historical wrongs. And we shouldn't believe that Aboriginals can take law into their own hands and beat people over the head with baseball bats. And one gentleman has permanent brain damage now. Like the OPP go around and say, well, at least no one got hurt. Are you kidding? You mean nobody that you want, that you care about? Residents were hurt all the time. They were put in the hospital. Over 70 OPP officers were put in the hospital. And so Commissioner Fantino would go on the air and complain about me walking down the road with a Canadian flag. That's all I did. They would bring in 400 officers to stop me from walking down a road with a Canadian flag. Because how dare I? It was like the southern states where a black person cannot walk down a white neighborhood. How dare they think that they can drink from the wrong fountain or ride the bus in the wrong chair or walk into a white neighborhood. That was Caledonia. How dare I walk down the main street in Caledonia with a Canadian flag? And why was that so offensive? Because for almost a year, the Aboriginals had put up Mohawk warrior flags on people's homes, on hydro towers, on the roads, on businesses, and declared that they were no longer in Canada, that Caledonia was no longer part of Canada. And so, how dare I declare, by walking down the road in Caledonia, that no, we are in Canada. And so I didn't have to worry about the Aboriginals attacking me because 400 officers would come up and try to stop me from walking down the road with a Canadian flag. Sometimes I was arrested for trespassing. I didn't know you could be arrested for trespassing for using a road. Sometimes I was arrested because they say I was obstructing police. Sometimes it was something else. Sometimes it was just, let's just put them in jail overnight. They were very creative on how they could abuse our rights. And for most people, they responded in violence and anger and racial slurs. And probably what peeved off the OPP and the natives so much was I didn't do any of that. We could have angry thugs within 3 feet of me, almost spitting at me, cursing and swearing and calling people to kill me. But I would not respond with swearing or racial slurs or even in anger. Even on one particular occasion where they swarmed me, knocked me to the ground, our cameraman was unconscious, I ended up in the hospital. I still did not swear back. We can stand for the truth. We can walk that line and say, we are not going to give up our rights. Not the thugs. We live in a country where people have fought for our freedoms. How many people have laid down their lives, not just for their own personal freedom, but freedoms for this country and for other countries around the world? For 1,000 years under the British system, there was a constant battle to bring us the rights that we now enjoy. And in many ways, our generation, which benefits from the rights that people have fought for, in many ways don't appreciate them. We do not stand for them. We do not draw the red line in the sand with the government and say, we will not forfeit this right. That's the end. We draw the line in the sand and we will stand toe to toe with you. And so, like I said, they would have hundreds of officers. And you would have to watch the videos of us simply trying to put a Canadian flag on a hydro pole when you can see in the town hundreds of Mohawk warrior flags on hydro poles, but the one flag I want to put up was declared to be illegal. Not any of the other flags. And so the goal was to bring the media to Caledonia, have the media see that you could see all these other flags, and the only flag that the OPP and Ontario government, McGuinty government, considered to be illegal was the Canadian flag that we were trying to put up. Now, it's outrageous, but we see this all through Western society at the moment. Whether you look in Europe, whether you look in other places, there's this concept that Western culture has to forfeit its values in order to appease people who are prepared to use violence in the name of some sort of culture that they have. Well, that's not what we stood for as Canadians. Certainly not what we stand for as Christians. Right? One of the fundamental beliefs is that we are all created in the image of God. Each and every single one of us have inherent values, and I don't have rights because the government declares I have rights. I have rights because God gives me the rights. And whether or not Caesar wants to believe in those rights, that's their problem, not mine. And if we want to turn to particular examples in the Bible, Paul, who traveled around speaking in different towns, after he was become very effective at his message and people started converting, in one particular town, a great crowd gathered together to oppose him, because how dare he come into town again and preach the gospel, because people were starting to believe and the businesses were losing money selling all their golden idols. And so what was the Roman response to an angry mob confronting a peaceful person who's just exercising free speech? They put him in jail. They beat him. That was the response of the Romans 2,000 years ago. And it's the same response now. That the OPP and the Ontario government, and in Canada, doesn't matter what province you'd be in, the response is simply to deal with the ones who are peaceful and arrest them and declare them to be the radical in order to appease those who are violent in our community. And so when Paul was thrown in jail and they wanted to release him in the middle of the night, he says to them, "Me being a Roman, and you have beaten me?" So Paul's solution at the moment, it was to declare his rights as a Roman citizen. You, the guards, have arrested me, you have beaten me, and I'm a Roman citizen. And we read how the Roman guards responded. They became afraid because they weren't dealing with a non-Roman who they could treat like dirt. They were acting out against someone who had inherent rights in their society. So they said to him, "No, you go." And Paul says, "No, you arrested me in broad daylight in front of all people. You don't get to release me in the middle of the night where nobody can see." That was his response in Scripture. Okay? He stood for his rights. He held them accountable. You did this to me. All people are going to see what you've done. And I'm going to expose you for what you did. Now, another occasion, Paul's arrested, and the Roman governor says, well, are you prepared to go before the Sanhedrin to be judged? And Paul's response is, I'm a Roman. I appeal to Caesar. And so Paul's response to some of the abuses that he experienced, and I don't think Rome was a great country for civil rights and for the charter rights of citizens, but even in his society, in his culture, he understood he could use the system to further his gospel message. That he could use the system to expose the injustice of pagan beliefs. And we live in a country that, in many ways, has forgotten the foundations that this country was built on. Our freedoms are not here by accident. It wasn't Darwin that came up with democracy, or the justice system, or the Charter of Rights, or the Bill of Rights, or Habeas Corpus Act, or any of the other things. These were fought by Christians. The Puritans cut off the head of the king to establish that everyone is subject to the law. There is nobody, from the peasant on the street to the king himself, who's permitted to violate the law. And at the time, society believed in the divine rights of kings. Kings could do what they wanted. They could take your land, they could put you to death, they could enslave you, and they were not accountable not only to humans, but they honestly believed, as divine rights of king, they would never be judged by God for their abuses on people. That was their belief. And Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans said, no. Not only are you subject to God's law, and you will be judged by God, but you'll be judged by our law, British law, because you've committed these crimes. And after the king was put to death, they brought in the first Bill of Rights anywhere in the world. The concept that average citizen actually had rights. And they brought in the Habeas Corpus Act, which, by the way, is still effective to this very day. And what that means, you might have heard the phrase on TV, it means that every single citizen, if you ever find yourself in jail, have a right to appeal to the king and say, why am I in jail? And the jail must appear before the king's representative and justify why you're in jail. Now, I'm one of the few people who've done that particular application. And in Canada, the king's representative, or the queen's representative, is the Superior Court. In most provinces, it's called the Queen's Bench. And so Superior Court judges, even to this day, are the representative of the Queen. They're not the representative of the Canadian government. And so you can appeal to the Queen. You as a citizen, you can go and say, my rights have been violated. The very things that were set down by the Puritans, the things that Christians died for, to say that you have inherent rights, the Bill of Rights, Habeas Corpus Act, and many of the other things that we hold dear today, did not come from pagan society, did not come from liberal thinking. It came from devoted Christians who believed that God has instilled certain values in every single person. That your rights are not determined by the color of your skin or by which group you belong to. Now, it doesn't mean it hasn't been abused in the past. That's human nature. We read that in the Bible too. But the truth of the matter, the principles by which even the liberals today who would say, yeah, we believe in this, but you don't believe in it. All you got to do is look at Caledonia. We don't have the liberals coming and saying, no, it's wrong for this violence to take place. It went on for years. And so it was easy for the OPP to target me. I wasn't going to respond and punch them in the head. It was easy to put handcuffs on me because I wasn't going to do anything. So how do we resolve the problem when you have the full resources of the government? The OPP announced to the public that it was costing $250,000 every day I walked down the road with a Canadian flag. Because that's how many officers they had to come in, bring in to stop me. Well, my solution was to walk down the road more. Because although the government, you think the government has endless money, They don't have endless money to throw like Gary McHale. They would rather buy your vote some other way. But that's the way the government responded. Full resources. OPP would have helicopters, bomb squad, Greyhound vans with OPP officers in it. Day after day, whenever we did this. And as was said earlier, I was in jail 9 times, prosecuted 3 times, and never met, not a single case met at the trial. One time they prosecuted me for 30 months. It must have cost millions. Millions. Now, I didn't know the law. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a paralegal. I'm good at debating. I'm the youngest of 6 boys. And I guess as the youngest of 6 boys, I don't get intimidated very easily. Maybe I'm too stupid, got hit too many times by one of my brothers. But I know how to debate, I know how to stand up for myself. And so I fought in court. And at first it's difficult. But I've now won at the highest courts. And what I did was to say this one basic principle. You want to hold me accountable to the law. That's fine, you can do that. But I will hold you accountable to the same law that you hold me accountable. And what I mean by that is when they're prosecuting me, they have to give me all the officers' notebooks. And so I'd go through the officers' notebooks to see which ones committed crimes. See, what did they do that was illegal? And so in one particular example, the Deputy Commissioner of the OPP, Chris Lewis, emailed his officers and told them, you will arrest Gary McHale regardless of the evidence. Well, I took that to court. That's obstructing justice. You can't arrest someone regardless of what the evidence says. You have to arrest them if you believe them committed a crime. You're not arresting them for political reasons. And so, time after time, we took videos of OPP officers building barricades with natives and took that to court. Got them charged. Commissioner Fantino, he was losing it. Every time he heard my name, he would do something stupid. And so one day he emails the local mayor and council member and basically says to them this: if you say anything positive about Gary McHale, I'm going to punish you the following ways. And he lists out 4 ways in which he's going to punish the mayor and elected officials in that particular community. Now, under the criminal code, it appears that you're allowed to threaten MPs and MPPs, but it's actually a criminal offense to threaten the local mayor and council. And so I took his email to court, and the government would send out 3 lawyers, every one of my court appearances. They would argue against me and argue against me, had to go over and over again, make it up through the system, till finally when the court said, no, this is a threat, and Fantino will be charged. And the court issued the charges. Now, what did the government do? Well, of course, they stepped in right away and dropped the charge, but it was on record. The courts agreed with me that you should be faced with criminal charges. And if you're going to keep arresting me and prosecuting me, then you better obey the very laws that you claim that you're upholding. And so time and time again, I just kept charging the OPP for offenses until they got the message, better not arrest me because it's not worth it. Then we took this next step. Canada is a unique country. If we as Christians believe we are to obey Caesar, which the Bible tells us, then it must be that we must obey the government that we have been given by God. We don't live in the United States. We don't live in Russia. We don't live in China. So what I'm about to tell you does not exist in the United States, doesn't exist virtually anywhere else in the world, but Canada permits every single citizen the right to do arrests and to start prosecutions. You can't do citizens arrests in the United States, but you can in Canada. If I'm aware of an offense, I'm able to go to court and issue criminal charges against anybody that I can prove has committed an offense. That's called private prosecution. It has the same authority and force to it as a police officer making an arrest. And the government said, no, you can't do this. We can't allow you to do this. We can't allow you to present evidence before a judge. So every time I would stand up, they would interfere and stop the proceedings and claim that the Crown has ultimate rights over all criminal type cases. And of course, historically, that is 100% true. But that went all the way up to the Court of Appeal, and they agreed with me. In actual fact, the government started in 1990s something called a white papers on this particular issue. That's where they bring forward a bunch of lawyers and judges, and they study whether or not we should allow citizens in Canada the right to make arrests and to prosecute people, because it's not happening anywhere else. If you ever read the report, it talks about what's happening in Australia and England and the United States, and it doesn't happen in those countries. So the first thing the judges and lawyers said is, we don't think it should happen in Canada. But they did a thorough study. At the end of the study, they said, we thought you should discontinue this. But we have concluded the citizen's right to make an arrest and to prosecute people is the last line of defense for democracy. That it is vital to Canadian democracy to empower citizens with this authority. And they told the government, you should change all the laws to encourage this. And in 2002, the government went through the criminal code, and everywhere it said Crown Prosecutor, they dropped the word Crown, it said Prosecutor, and at the beginning of the criminal code it says Prosecutor is either the Crown or a private citizen. So in 2002, the government goes through the laws and changes it to give us additional power, even though nobody was using it. Now, historically, prior to 1880, there was never a Crown Prosecutor in the British system. There was no government employee who prosecuted criminal cases prior to 1880, either in Canada or in Britain. So how did criminal cases get prosecuted prior to 1880? You and me. Every citizen had the right to duty to uphold the honor of the king. And if someone was committing a crime, it was being committed against a citizen of the king, and you had a duty not only to arrest that person, but to prosecute that person. Until 1880, there was never a government employee whose job it was to do that. So within 100 years of 1880, we have completely given up, which historically we had. Now you think of England in the 1600s. There's a lot of turmoil. Whether you had a Catholic king or a Protestant king, people were being persecuted. And so they had to develop a system to resolve the conflict within society. So how are we going to bring peace to the British Empire when we have this inherent problem? I think we have a problem today. Now it's not just Catholics and Protestants. It may be Christians and other groups. But the problem is still there. How do we ensure peace in the community when we have these inherent problems going on? Well, the British solution was very unique, not duplicated by any other system in the world. If you look up the criminal code today and look up what's the definition of a police officer, we all think it's the OPP or the local city police. The first person in the list of police officer in the criminal code is the mayor. Wow, have you ever heard that? Have you ever heard that your mayor is a police officer empowered the same way, with the same authority and the same rights as a cop? Never heard of it. Because ultimately, the mayor and the council and us, the citizens, it's our duty to maintain the peace in our neighborhood. It's our duty to maintain law and order. It's our duty. So in Caledonia, when we had vans being thrown over the bridge on the overpass down the vehicles below, and we had power stations being firebombed, and roadblocks for weeks at a time, what was the mayor doing? Well, I understand our culture has given up all this. We've forgotten all about the fact that we the people. This is not an American concept. We hear Americans say, we the people. But it's the British concept. We have been empowered because we are our brother's keeper. We are the Good Samaritan. This is a Christian concept. How do you drive down the road and see your neighbor being robbed or your neighbor being abused by some government official and turn a blind eye and say, I'm a good Christian today? These are Christian concepts. If you only stand up or get riled up when your rights are being violated, then you're no different than the pagans. But if you can get worked up and stand up for the rights of others and pay the cost and be slandered by the police and by the government. I mean, the police used to go around and tell the businesses in Caledonia that I was a neo-Nazi. On December 28th of 2006, 2 OPP officers traveled to New York City, New York State, and met with a native private eye down there. And the very next day, that native private eye created a neo-Nazi website under my name. Everything was posted by Gary McHale, called The White Supremacist Leader of Canada. Had a photo of me, posted by Gary McHale. Photo of my wife, posted by Gary McHale. And this was completely set up to make it look like I was a white supremacist. Now, the only problem the OPP had was, at the time, I happened to live in Richmond Hill. Richmond Hill is York Regional Police. So I informed them that somebody was using my name. They investigated, and that's how I know the details of who created the website. Later on, when they finally arrested me once in Caledonia and prosecuted me, they were forced to turn over their internal documents, and that's how I found out the 2 OPP officers on December 28th traveled to New York State. The system will work if we stand up for ourselves, if we don't give up, if we don't bend with the fear, we don't give in to the intimidation, the threats. And believe me, there's times when you do feel afraid. You can't be in a situation where an angry mob, twice, 3 times the size of this, and you know the OPP aren't going to protect you, and not feel, you know, you're putting something at risk today. But what are you going to do? What are your options? Are we going to be ruled by mobs in this country? That's what the government's prepared to do. As long as we don't look, as long as it's not our community, as long as we live far enough away so we don't see the abuse. But we've seen that throughout human history. Why didn't Christians rise up and black people were being abused in the southern states? You can go through example after example and realize there's time in every generation where we, the Christians, have to rise up and take a stand and say to the government that you cannot do what you're doing. You cannot read the Bible without seeing how God says, give justice to the stranger. You can't read it without understanding that part of God's character is justice, and that the system that we have here on earth, although it's imperfect, is supposed to represent His idea of what justice is. And we are to fight, as our forefathers did, to ensure that those systems are functioning properly. Now, Caledonia was resolved not the way the government wanted it. I guess I must have worn the OPP out, and it wasn't just me, there was a small group of us. We only had maybe 20 people ever show up to any of my rallies, but the government knew that the public itself supported what we did. I ran for the federal election in Caledonia. It's a very big riding. I didn't win the riding, but I ran as an independent. And in Caledonia, which had close to 4,000 votes in that town, I beat out both the Conservatives and the Liberals and the NDP in Caledonia. I got 5,000 votes in total in that riding. An independent person normally gets 250. That sent shockwaves through the government. Because imagine trying to convince a community to vote for the person who's been to jail so many times. During the election, I was barred from being in a Tim Hortons if there was more than 10 people. I was under court order on certain places I could not go in town. I had to run an election based on the fact that the government had charges against me. Probably the first person in the history of Canada who's ever campaigned while facing criminal charges. But I can remember what the judge said. He said to me when I said, well, these conditions are outrageous. He said, well, you get more votes for it, Gary. And he was right. He knew what the public thought. He knew that it was outrageous what the Crown was doing. And I did get more votes because of it. People were outraged. How dare I can't stand in a Tim Hortons with more than 10 people? I can remember being in court one day and I said to the judge, what am I supposed to do when if an 11th person walk in? And the Crown says, well, you gotta leave. Oh, there's a campaign slogan. More than 10, I gotta leave. But this is Canada. We told the world, come to Canada and you'll be treated equally, regardless of your race, regardless of your skin color, regardless of whatever. It's not true. If we do not stand, we will lose it all. If anyone here has not seen a difference in the last 50 years, you must be blind. Amen. And the difference really is that most Christians are asleep. We've been convinced that we are to live in peace with everybody, and you are. But that doesn't mean you sit at home and go to church and speak in the 4 square walls of the church and do nothing. After praying, you get up and do something. You can't be salt if you don't share it. You can't be light if you put it under a basket. Those who want to live a righteous life will be persecuted. It doesn't say may. We may want to live in peace, but if we stand for what we believe in, guess what? They hate us. Do you think the anger that I experienced over years, do you think that was because I was doing something wrong? Or because I just dared to stand up and say, no, this is Canada, we have rights here. Now, the OPP went on TV, radio, newspaper, constantly bad-mouthing me. But it was a simple message. And believe me, the media was more than willing. You think for a moment, I used to say, I'm the worst citizen in this country. I'm white. I'm a male. I'm a Christian. So obviously, I'm a bigot. I'm a chauvinist pig. It's clear. If you speak up, you're wrong. I can remember one of the events we did. We were very creative on some of the things we did, because you got to get media attention. And we finally convinced the OPP to let us put some signs up on hydro poles. It only took us like 7 years and many arrests. And so they said, okay, you can put a sign up. So we got our ladder out. I hid the signs. We had big, big signs. And the person got up on the ladder and says, okay, Gary, pass up the sign. And so I slowly pulled it out, and he goes and starts screwing in and said, no Jews allowed by order of McGinty. And why? Because that's the road. The main road in Caledonia, where only Aboriginals could use. So it was a true statement. No Jews were allowed. The next sign was said no blacks allowed. The next sign was no whites allowed. We didn't get to those signs because I ended up in jail after the no Jews allowed. But it told the truth. We lived in a community in which, based on your race, you had completely free reign to commit any crime you wanted, whereby the OPP would not intervene and stop the crime. It doesn't matter how violent it was. It didn't matter if the violence was even directed against OPP officers. They would still not intervene. In one particular case, the government was prosecuting me, claiming that I blocked the road. It's kind of difficult to figure out how that was when there was already a hydro tower across the road the natives pulled out behind me, and then in front of me there was already native trucks blocking the road this way. But apparently, I guess I was blocking the road. Can't figure that one out. But anyways, I was prosecuted for 30 months. And I used the opportunity to get every officer's notebook. And unknown to me, just around the corner, the OPP had a checkpoint there. And a native driver drove up and drove into an OPP officer twice. And the officer said, started moving the car. A third time, the officer said, you move the car, I'm going to pull my gun. So the native gets out of the car and goes over and starts pushing him around. Remember, this is a checkpoint, so there's other officers there. So what happened? Well, it was easy. You open up the line, you let them go. Don't write down their names or license plates. You only run into a cop with a car, right? It's not as if it's a serious crime. It's only attempted murder with a vehicle. Like, come on. But this is the way it was, and this is the way it will be again anytime political correctness overcomes justice. And we're seeing it all through Western society. Because we've been told that our culture, which has fundamentally been shaped by Christianity, has no real value. That somehow liberalism is what got us to where we are. Are they so naive and foolish to believe that? But we've been convinced it. And even the Conservative Party tells us. Like I think of when Harper was running for election, telling everyone, just remain silent. I got to get in power first. And then when he got his minority, he said, remain silent because I have to get a majority. And then when he got a majority, he says, oh, we've got to remain silent because I got to stay in power. And by the time he got out of power, he didn't do vast majority of the things that everyone thought he was going to do. And once again, we're told, remain silent. I heard it time and time again with the PC Party of Ontario, John Tory, Tim Hudak, and now Brown. Like, it's all the same story. Christians, shut up, and we will make changes. That's not true. You water it down, you remove the light, you remove the salt, and what do you get? You get nothing. You get the same old, and the system keeps going worse to worse. That's where we're at in this country. We're at a crossroads where we can make a decision. So in Caledonia, one of the things that really resolved the problem was when I stumbled across the concept that we can arrest people. Now I didn't have to ask the OPP to arrest a native. I could arrest a native. Now the OPP didn't have the discretion. They can't say, well, we decided not to make an arrest. I didn't actually make the arrest. I did. Now you got a problem. Now what are you going to do with my prisoner? Now you may think this is strange, but in areas of Caledonia where the OPP had never made an arrest, we have a video where I went into this subdivision that the OPP hadn't been in for years. And the natives did what they normally do. They came out and walked and stood in front of me, let me walk down the road. Well, that's mischief. That's a criminal act. You cannot block someone from using a road. So I arrested the person. Now, it's very simple. You just got to touch them on the shoulder, touch them anywhere, and say you're under arrest and state the charge. That's it. Then I got on 911 and said to the OPP, you have a choice. I've arrested this native protester. Me and my buddies can use all force necessary to throw him in our car and take him to jail. Or you can send a cop car. What do you want us to do? They sent us a cop car. They weren't going to let us use force, legally use force, granted to us by the Criminal Code of Canada, and force this person to jail. So the two officers showed up. I thought we were just going to get some BS story, and the officer says, okay, what was the charge? And quickly looked at our video. And they went over and arrested the guy. Well, the guy was so shocked that the OPP were doing an arrest that he kind of resisted, threw him off. Well, the video showed it looked really quite violent. All they really did is throw him on the ground to get handcuffs on him because he was resisting, right? But the natives were shocked. The OPP don't do this. You don't arrest us for stopping Gary McHale. We've been doing it for 8 years. And you've helped us. You put him in jail every time. Now you're arresting us. And they had to carry him to the police car and throw him in the back seat because he refused to walk. So he just went limp. Which is not resisting, by the way. That's not resisting. You're just not helping him. But it looked violent on the video. Well, that caused the natives to get upset again. How dare you allow Gary to enforce the law? So we did a couple more rallies, and another rally, I showed up, and a native woman was blocking me from walking down the road. I said, okay, there's probably about 40 cops around us. So I put her under arrest. There was a cop right beside me. So I said, okay, here's my prisoner. And he says to me, well, I'm going to let her go. Well, the sergeant was on this side, and I said to the sergeant, well, if he lets her go, I'm going to arrest him. Because he's not allowed to aid someone in escape from custody. And that person's in my custody. And the police don't have an option. It's not their prisoner, it's my prisoner. Just like I don't have a right to interfere if they make an arrest. Like a citizen's arrest has the same authority and force as a police officer. And he cannot interfere with my arrest. And so we went back and forth, and I'm thinking in my head, are they really going to let me touch a police officer? Because you don't touch a police officer, right? Even a little bit. So I'm thinking, okay, they don't seem to be arguing with me too much. I'm going to do that. So I put them under arrest. Just touch the shoulder, says you're under arrest for aiding an escape from custody. And I phoned up 911, asked for a paddy wagon to come out. I said, you have two options. Me and my buddies can grab them and use all reasonable force, throw them in our car, and take them to jail. Or you can send me a car. And then I hung up. Now, 911 has a problem. If you hang up on 911, they have to call you back. So they call me back, and I give the whole story again. Right? Now, 911 also records all phone calls. So they have a record that I've arrested a police officer, what particular crime, or what day, or what time, and my request for a vehicle. So they sent me a vehicle. Even though I said, look, I got 40 officers around, but I can't turn them over to those officers. They're all part of the offense. Right? So they sent me a vehicle. Now, they were trying to humor me because they were just taking me to the police station so I could fill out a complaint. So when I got to the police station, they said, okay, well, tell us all the things the natives were doing that day. I said, I'm not here to talk about natives. I arrested a police officer. You are obligated to investigate the police officer. They said, no, we're not investigating him. We're going to talk to you about the natives. I said, no, that's not what I phoned 911 about. So they had to go and pull the 911 tape. And once they realized I phoned in about the police officer, which gives it an incident number, they were duty bound to investigate that particular crime. So they assigned 2 detectives for a couple weeks to investigate that officer. Now, do I think they were going to say the officer committed a crime? No. No way were they going to do that. But think of the mentality of the police. Not only are they no longer intimidating me, but I'm arresting them at rallies and getting away with it and causing investigations into their conduct by their detectives. Now, what do you think that means the next time there's a rally? Do you think any of the officers are going to be, too quick to focus on me? No. It sends a powerful message. We will not surrender our rights to you. We're here peacefully. We're standing up for what we have all believed in for hundreds of years. And we're not going to forfeit it because you are a bunch of thugs. And we see the same thing today, right? On Friday, I spent the whole day on Friday in court on behalf of somebody else, cross-examining a conservation officer. It was precious, believe me. Not only did I get him to admit on stand that the charges against the person I'm helping, he's the one that committed the offense, not them, but he admitted that his supervisors know about it and agree with it, and that they do the same kind of thing when they go on other people's property. And so we have in this province, for the last 30 or 40 years, what governments have done, both federal and provincial, politicians have gotten very crafty. They don't want to take the blame for all the things that have been happening in society. So what they did was they slowly gave certain authorities to various agencies. So we got to conservation officers, right? We got Hydro One that can come on your property. We got Children Aid. We got the various organizations, which all in and of themselves, if you look at it on face value, have some value to why they should be here. However, in my view, every single one of them have become power hungry. They do not honor the rights of people. They do not respect the rights of people. We have institutions that have no guidance in the sense of their accountability, and they do what they please. They come onto people's property, they gather evidence illegal without search warrants, they enter people's homes without warrants, they cross-examine people without reading them their rights, they interfere with economic development of businesses, and it's over and over and over and over again. The very things that our forefathers fought against, the fact that your house, your home is your castle, that even the King of England cannot enter your home. People died for those principles. We have now forfeited, within one generation, we have forfeited our land rights, forfeited our human rights to these agencies that they think they can do as they please. And they think that nobody will hold them accountable. Of course nobody will hold them accountable. Their bosses are part of the problem. Like this officer on the stand admitted, I said, well, when you went for training, you took a course in law enforcement, yes. Did they ever teach you about the Charter of Rights? Yes. Well, what did your instructors tell you? I have to get a search warrant every time. Do you do that? No, I don't. Would he agree with you? No, 100% he wouldn't agree with me. Well, he's admitting on the stand. He's violating his own training. He violates the law repeatedly and thinks he can do it anytime he wants. And the prosecutor stands up and says that what he did was right. You know, another 30 years, you're not going to have very many rights. I don't have children. I don't have to worry about what Canada's going to be like 40 years from today. It's not my children or my grandchildren that are going to be affected if we don't take a stand. But you're not going to have rights in 30 or 40 years. You go to many parts of Europe, and you will find that many citizens don't have rights in certain parts of certain cities. My book that I wrote, which is in the right up in here, says Victory in the No-Go Zone. The reason that it was titled that was the OPP would at the spur of the moment say that part of the road is a no-go zone. Gary, you have to be in it, so you're under arrest. And that's what they did, roaming no-go zone. Whenever they felt like saying, oh, you're in a no-go zone, Gary, you're under arrest. Well, did you tell me that before? No, it changed. Right? It wasn't that way 20 minutes ago, it is that way now. And we have this all through Europe. We have no-go zones, literally. And what it means is police do not go into certain zones in certain cities, regardless how much violence is being committed. Doesn't matter who's being abused. The police do not go. And in Caledonia, there was streets that didn't have 911 service for 6 years. That is not exaggerating. Not exaggerating at all. And so the native protesters would know which streets do not have policing. That's what the country we're in. And it's not going to get any better. Do you think suddenly tomorrow, Kathleen Wynne wakes up and realizes McGuinty was wrong, I shouldn't allow the police to do this? Are you kidding me? It's not happening. Do you think the PC party is going to stand up and say, hey, there's something wrong here? We can't have people being policed by the color of their skin or by their religious beliefs? No, they're not going to do anything. There's examples in downtown Toronto where a Jewish man was walking a dog and some Muslim people said, no, that dog's unclean, and so you can't be walking the dog on the street. And the police would approach the Jewish man and said, you can't be here. You don't leave, we're going to arrest you. Come on, what are you talking about? Because one group of people decide that they don't like dogs in the neighborhood, so every single person that lives in that neighborhood are now banned from having dogs? That's the size society we want? That if they declare all of a sudden that whatever, alcohol is wrong, every restaurant has to give it up? Now, some people may like that idea, but it cannot be forced upon society by an individual group. It cannot be forced without the changing of laws. If you don't like the laws, you change the laws. But you don't use violence to force your will upon people. And we've seen over and over again, anyone who speaks up will be labeled as a racist, a bigot. Well, that's what Jesus says. We're told we're going to be cursed, that all kinds of evil will be said against you. So why are we surprised when it happens? I think we're surprised because we've been sold a bill of goods. That we as Christians, if we live a good Christian life, will live in peace with our neighbor. I don't see that in the Bible. I don't see Jesus saying that. I see him saying the exact opposite, and repeatedly saying the exact opposite. And many of the parables saying the exact opposite. So we shouldn't be surprised. But at the same time, I'll end with the following. We don't have to live in fear. We haven't been given the spirit of fear, the spirit of sonship by which we cry out, Abba, Father. The one who's for me, then who can be against me? Like, I stand, God is my Father, Christ is my brother, who's going to stand against me? It doesn't mean I'm a holy person. I will make mistakes all the time. But I don't write the future. I don't dictate the terms of society. God has his plan. If we are willing, he will use us. And we say, how do I know what to say? The Bible says, do not worry. For in your time of need, I will speak through you. All you have to do is be available. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple of interesting things. Although I now argue in court constantly and do massive write-ups for different levels of court, and I stand up here and do public speaking. Hopefully I sound like I am very confident in what I say. When I left high school, I was illiterate. Couldn't read and write. Functionally illiterate. If I wrote a paragraph and you had to read it, you wouldn't understand it. You'd think I was writing in a different language. That's when I left high school. When I was in high school and the teacher said, we all have to do 5-minute public speaking, and they got around to saying, Gary, it's your turn, my response was, write down 0, I'm not doing it. And that's what I did. I just simply refused. You couldn't get me to do public speaking. But I wasn't raised a Christian, I was a pagan. You know, I often make the comment that my family was the Black Donnellys of the community. And if you know anything about the Black Donnellys, we're 6 boys, no girls. My mother died when I was very young, my father was never around, and literally, we could do what we wanted. I missed every Friday of school for the entire year. Every Friday. I had that Friday illness, right? And no one did anything about it. We did what we wanted when we wanted. Because our parents weren't around. People felt bad, you know, in a small community. Mother's died, his father's not around. We can't really expect too much from them. That was my childhood. When I was 7 years old, we had a game. Who could steal the most number of chocolate bars in one trip to the store? I set the record. I could steal, at 7 years old, I could steal 26 chocolate bars in one trip to the store. By the time I was a teenager, I was an expert. That was just kids' play at 26. But I became a Christian in my early 20s. Those things are past. So I understand lawlessness. I understand responding. Hey, if I was a teenager and you did something against me, believe me, we did 10 things back to you. That was our solution. But Christianity doesn't teach that. We don't curse people when they curse us. We don't lash out in violence when they lash out in violence against us. We stand for truth, we stand for justice, but we stand. We don't give an inch, regardless how dangerous the situation is. Thank you.